Annyeong! Today I'll be showing you how to make awesome doll armor with very common and simple materials. For this tutorial, I will be making Sylvanas Windrunner from Warcraft. First and foremost, plan out your armor. Whether it's taken from an existing design or you're making it up, planning a schematic makes the whole process easier and faster. Some questions to ask yourself might be, how will this stay on the doll? Should I use snaps or hook and eyes to keep this in place? How can I break this complicated leg armor design into 4 or 5 pieces that can assemble? Stuff like that. With my plans nearby, it's time to demonstrate armor making method number 1. Fun foam. I don't know if this material is officially named Fun Foam or if that's just the brand, but that's what I always called it. Cheap and easy to find at craft stores, all you need is one small sheet of the stuff. Step 1. Using your doll to reference size, sketch out the general size and shape of a single piece you want to make. Cut it out. Step 2. Light a candle. Use a scrap piece at first to play around with and learn how the foam reacts to heat. The longer you hold it over the flame, the floppier and thinner it gets. Remove it once it's heated and mash it around using your fingers or other tools to shape it before it hardens again. Be really careful if you use your hands like I do though. Right off the flame is too hot to touch, so wait a couple of seconds so that you don't burn yourself. There's a small window of opportunity where it's still flexible but cool enough to touch. I can personally tell you that fun foam isn't nearly as fun when it's singeing off your fingerprints. You can condense the foam into some pretty wild curves and shapes, but it can only stretch so far, so consider layering 2 pieces together to form more complicated structures. Once they are formed, this is a good time to add straps or snaps, any pieces that will allow the armor to be removable. I'm creating tiny fabric straps with snaps for these pieces, which will go around the doll's thighs. Then I sewed the straps right onto the fun foam, strategically placing the stitches in an area that will be concealed in the next step. For her shoes, I hot glued the top to the sole just to keep it in place, while I securely stitched the pieces together, forming a nice little removable shoe. If you've got a piece that needs articulation, now's the time to add that. I like to poke thin wires through the foam to create tiny hinges, which you can then cover later with hot glue or fabric paint. Speaking of which, Step 3. Once the basic shapes are complete, grab a small bottle of fabric paint or puffy paint. This stuff is great for lining the armor and creating raised edges or designs on the fun foam. It dries very slowly over about 7 hours or more, depending on the brand, so if you mess up or draw a line too blobby, don't sweat it. You can wipe it off completely and try again, or use a tool to shape it back in place. It is all too easy to knock a piece over and immediately ruin all that hard work, so I like to do this a few pieces at a time and take it slow. Because fabric paint does take so long to dry, make sure you have an isolated, safe drying area that's inaccessible to curious cats and other hazards. If you don't want to wait, you can also use hot glue to create raised designs. It dries much faster, but you will have less control and can't form delicate shapes. Unless you're a hot glue gun master, I recommend the fabric paint. Step 4. Add distress to the armor. I know it feels wrong taking a knife to your precious, delicately crafted pieces, but trust me, it makes the armor look so cool. Take a razor or a small pair of scissors and go to town. It's up to you to decide how much wear and tear or battle damage to add, but I would suggest at least a little. Adding cuts and dents makes the armor realistic and believable. Step 5. Paint. This is perhaps the most important part in making the fun foam look like metal. Start by painting all the pieces a darker brown or black color. Make sure to work it into all the cracks and dents. Even if you used a dark color foam to begin with, coating it in acrylics helps prime the surface, especially around the slippery fabric paint parts. Next, add your main color. I will be working in both metal paints and Pearl X powders to give a shiny effect. Metallic pigments can be pricey, but a little goes a long way, especially for tiny doll armor. Once I painted all my pieces, I realized it was a little too sparkly for the character I was making, so I toned it down and added more saturation with a thin, watered-down layer of purple acrylic paint. You can see the difference here on the shoulder pads. The last things to paint are the raised details. You can pick these out easily by dragging a brush with the color you want over the surface, letting the paint naturally pick out the details in the sculpting. Doing this is called dry brushing. You can also dry brush over the battle damage to highlight the dents and scratches. For more precision, like on the tiny parts, I do go in with a little brush to get things just right. If you get too crazy with the dry brushing, just cover it up with a little more of the other colors and nobody will notice. And that's how you turn fun foam into armor. Armor making method number 2, Apoxy Sculpt. Fun foam is perfect for the weak, stick-armed dolls to wield because it's so lightweight. But for areas where weight isn't a concern, Apoxy Sculpt can prove very useful. Step 1. Saran wrap your doll if you want the armor to be removable. Step 2. Mix the 2-part Apoxy Sculpt and get to work. When mixed equally, the chemical reaction will cure the epoxy within about 3 to 5 hours. It gets harder slowly, so form the basic shape while it's squishy and malleable, and work in finer details later on when it's almost fully cured. I decided to use Apoxy Sculpt for her chest piece because I wasn't confident I'd be able to pull off that level of detail with fabric paint. I also decided to sculpt directly on her hands to form the gauntlets. I engineered everything else to be removable, but I just couldn't fathom making tiny removable gloves. I used the same material to form the skull details for the shoulder pads. These are so small, I'm hoping they won't add too much weight to the shoulders. I recommend the epoxy for any part of your armor that requires tiny detail. After they dried, I marked where I would place them and roughed up the fun foam so the glue had something to grab onto. Then I attached the skulls and some spikes with hot glue. Other techniques for your consideration. For weapons, the techniques are much the same, but I create an armature of lightweight wire as a basis for the fun foam to attach to. To make fancy little gems, paint the base color on the bottom. Then add some of this stuff. It's called Magic-Glos by Pavelka. I just discovered it, but I love this stuff. You dab on a little blob and then pop it into direct sunlight. The UV rays will cure the resin, and you're left with sparkling custom gems. Pretty cool, huh? Really, any material can work as long as it's painted to match in the end. For example, sometimes fabric can look as convincing when used in the right situations. I also use the silver paint directly from the tube to form the decorative trim along her hood. For the back of the shin guards, I used cereal box cardboard so that it would lay thin and flat underneath another fun foam piece and not add any bulk. And for the shoulder pad's feathers, I painted some computer paper and cut it in the right shapes before gluing them to the underside. basically what I'm trying to say is, use any combination of materials and methods shown here to achieve your desired design. Just look at what a colorful mess of different materials this was before I painted it. And while I didn't employ this technique for this set of armor, consider using actual chains and jewelry pieces. Like this interesting earring, for example. How could I incorporate this into armor? Also consider metallic fabrics. You might find something that could layer underneath and look like chainmail, or discover an interesting trim that could be used somehow. It's always good to keep an open mind. But no matter how you approach it, I hope this video has given you some insight and techniques into creating your very own doll armor. Depending on its intricacy, it can take a while, but it's worth it in the end. Now that I've finally finished Sylvanas, let's get her dressed at last. To see how I painted her face up, click the video at the end. And if you'd like to show me a custom you made or how your armor turned out, feel free to tag me at Dollightfully on Instagram. There are so many possibilities with these techniques, I really can't wait to see what you come up with. I'm sure Queen Sylvanas would appreciate a thumbs up for her video. And for more doll customizing goodness, subscribe to Dollightful. Stay artsy! Annyeong!